Hello everybody, this is Bill McFadden from tonepure.com, and in this video we're going to take a look at how to capture the MIDI from the East West Opus orchestrator. So let's go ahead and add a track, an Opus track. So make sure you select the Opus version VST3. It's more reliable. And then we'll go ahead and select the orchestrator. We'll add that. We'll pick a preset. Let's go to the scores, in particular Hollywood Action. And I'll pick the fourth one, and we'll select that one. So I'll go ahead and play a few chords. I'll go ahead and actually I could do this live. So what I'll do is I will add a MIDI track. This is where we're going to capture the information. I'll just call it Midi Capture. And then I want the MIDI to come from the orchestrator. So there's Opus right there. So that's input. We don't need an output. So we'll say not connected. Then I'll go ahead and start recording. Both of them simultaneously, and I'm going to play a C minor chord to start with, and then I'll go to an A flat chord with a C in the bass, and then I'm going to type basically a B diminished seventh chord without the fifth. And then I'm going to a G chord with a B in the bass. Okay, so here we go. Start recording. Okay, so what just happened is we captured all of the MIDI in the Midi Capture. And so let's go ahead and look at the Midi Capture track. So there it is. And what I can now do is go to Midi Dissolve part and then choose Dissolve to Lanes. And then notice we have all this MIDI data, and it's not all in numerical order, but we can rearrange it in numerical order if we need to by just creating additional MIDI tracks and then copying everything to the MIDI tracks. So let's take a look at what we've got. First of all, the patch we chose, Hollywood Action 04, we can see the instruments. Here are the woodwind instruments, piccolo, flute, flutter tongue, English horn, and so on. Then we can go to brass. We see the trumpets, muted staccato here, crescendo, low brass. And then percussion, we have a bass drum and a timpani and a snare, and then the strings. So that describes the articulations that are captured in the MIDI. But the important thing is, going to the top, the woodwinds, we have the piccolo flutter tongue, which is abbreviated up here. Notice it's MIDI 1. So the MIDI from the piccolo flute is going to MIDI 1. MIDI 2 is going to be the English horn. MIDI 3 is going to be the clarinet legato. MIDI 4 is going to correspond to the bassoon. and so on. Then we go to the brass, which is the yellow, And then we have the French horns sustained, and that we see is in MIDI channel 5, and the 3-trumpet crescendo is MIDI 6, and so on. So that way we know what channels, and if we go on to the percussion, which is purple, but we have the timpani at channel 9, the bass drum at channel 10, and 11 is the snare. And then if we go to strings, we scroll down, we see we have the 18 violins in channel 12, second violin, spiccato in 13, and then the viola is in 14 right here, and then the cello 15, and the string bass would be 16. So when we then look at these captured channels, the corresponding, so if I want the string bass, that's 16, and then 15 is, they're sort of in reverse order. 15 is the cello, and 14 is the viola, and then 13 is first or second violin, and 12 is first violin. So these 4 right here would be your strings. And we could, so we could export the MIDI if we want to. Another thing which is probably advisable is to go ahead and create individual MIDI tracks, because these are just lanes of one MIDI track. So suppose I go ahead and add, I'll collapse the lanes, and then I'll just go ahead and add a few MIDI tracks. Generally speaking, 16 is the number of tracks used by Opus. And so I could go ahead and take those string tracks, so the Midi Capture, move it back up where it was. So I can take those lanes from the Midi Capture. In particular, if you remember, it was 12 through 16. Let's go 12 through 16. Command C for copy. I'll go ahead and paste. There we go. And that basically gives you those tracks. And you can drag them out. They're all sort of copied on top of one another. So there we go, 12. And then I'll put the 16 down here. 13, 14, 15, 16. So now I have them on individual tracks. And notice, actually you can do it in here. Let's say I want to take a look at lane 2, which is the track, which is MIDI channel 9. So I have to go back to my MIDI channels here to see which, so MIDI channel 9 is the timpani. So if I want to take a look at what that was, I can just go up to score, open the score editor, and there it is. So there's your timpani. And if you remember, 12 was the first violins. So I can open that up. That's what the first violins are playing. Now you may be wondering, okay, where's all of this? Where are these triplets coming from? Well, we just opened up the first violin. So if we go back to Opus and look at the first violins and close the preset browser, notice here's the MIDI that actually is editable by clicking here. So you can see the MIDI that was generated by the preset for the first violins. Second violins, violas, cellos, and also the basses. So the basses and cellos are doing the same rhythmic pattern, and then it looks like the first, second violins and violas are doing the same rhythmic pattern. So, and again, going down to to find out which MIDI channel for the strings, we have the 12 for the first violins, 13 for the second, and going down the order of violas, cellos, and basses being 16. So there you have all the MIDI. For example, if we go to 16, and be careful when you're going to 16, you want Midi Capture 16, not lane 16, because lane 16 is actually Midi Capture 1. But if we go to a lane 16 and open up the score, that was the bass, and so there you go. And then if you want, you can go to clefs and select the bass clef and click on the treble clef, and then you'll see it in the bass clef. So one other thing that's important to note, and that is the Midi Capture 1, the channel 1, does capture the first instrument. And then going back to Opus, let's see what the first instrument is. So if we scroll up, it's in the woodwinds. So it happens to be going to woodwinds. The piccolo flute. So in addition to the piccolo flute being recorded in MIDI 1, it also records the chords that were used to trigger Opus. Right up here, these same chords will also be in MIDI 1. So if you just want the piccolo flute by itself, you would have to take those out of the MIDI. So let's take a look at the MIDI 1, which is right here. And then we'll open it up in scores. So, and I'll go ahead and change the clef back to treble clef. So you see those are the chords that we had when we were recording. Actually, what am I looking at? Yeah, here's Midi Capture. So those were the chords that we typed in, if you'll remember. We started with the C minor, and we went to the A flat major, and then the B diminished with the 7 minus the 5, and then down to the G there with the B in the bass. So that pretty well gives you an idea how to get the MIDI out, and you can put it into these individual MIDI tracks if you want. So if you were to export, that way each of the parts would go to a different channel in whatever you're sort of importing it after you exported it. For example, if you're using Dorico or possibly a Sibelius, any of those scoring programs where you can export MIDI and import MIDI into them. So, Bill McFadden signing off from TonePure.com.